Hello, I'm Sachi Yanari-Rizzo, Curator, Prints and Drawings at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Every other month, I will be presenting an in-depth discussion of a topic related to the museum's collection of works on paper. These will coincide with exhibitions in the Print and Drawing Study Center that highlight themes from across the Fort Wayne Museum of Art's collection. The current exhibition in the Print and Drawing Study Center is called Comedy and Criticism, Satire in 19th and early 20th century Europe and North America. The long title is due to the inclusion of works from England, France, Mexico, and the US. As I began looking through the works in the collection, I discovered the essential ingredients for social and political satire include humor and implausibility. While they are entertaining, there is often a seriousness as well. I was reading the exhibition catalog Infinite Jest, organized by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One of the writers observed, "Artists know well how a memorable image can be used as a weapon to subvert power and undermine authority." Graphic satire was an art of the streets. They weren't shown in art galleries, but could be seen in print shops, for example. They were run by print publishers who sold them as single prints. In the mid-19th century, graphic satire migrated to illustrated newspapers and pictorial magazines. Graphic satire is ephemeral in nature. While we still find them entertaining, the manners, customs, historical characters, topical events, and other subjects of ridicule are specific to a time period and may be unfamiliar now. Political satire pokes fun at public figures, the government, and responds to important events. They can show weaknesses of the rich, famous, and powerful. Previously, when printmakers addressed politics, they relied on allegories and emblems to convey their opinions. On the left is an etching by British artist Charles Jameson Grant. Graphic satire flourished in 18th and 19th century London. Advancing printing technology, rising literacy rates, and a questioning of leadership made for a good climate for political cartoons. In Grant's print, the politicians are all lined up on latrines. Grant's work is hand-colored, which became common. The invention of hard cakes of soluble watercolor in 1780 meant that artists no longer had to grind and mix their own pigments. In mid-century, political cartoons and lithography and wood engraving became the norm, with the increase in illustrations in newspapers and magazines, including Harper's Weekly and Puck. Frederick Opper's lithograph on the right is chaotic. All sorts of American politicians and other speakers are presenting their stump speeches from actual tree stumps. Political cartoons became prevalent. After the American Revolution, they became protected as freedom of speech under the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The origins of graphic satire has no documented date of origin. Artists using exaggeration and distortion with the intention to make moral commentaries or reveal human folly can be seen as early as Egyptian papyrus, Greek and Roman vases, and Gothic manuscripts. The rise of commercial printmaking with the invention of movable type and the printing press, seen in Germany and Netherlands, was key to the growth of visual satire. Social satire centers on everyday happenings, social classes and human types, behavior, common failings, and daily irritations. Flemish artist Peter Bruegel the Elder and his contemporaries mocked human vices like lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, and pride. In this pair of engravings, we see differing kitchen scenes. One is of abundance, gluttony, and excess, and the other is of food scarcity and misery. This shows the contrast between feast and famine and reveals unappealing aspects of human nature. French artist Honoré Daumier made over 4,000 lithographs in his 40-plus years of commentary. He worked for the illustrated newspaper La Caricature. Censorship laws grew more strict after 1835. They forbade literal references to specific persons and institutions. It became more difficult to publish political imagery with its potential for insult and criticism. Daumier and La Caricature's publisher spent 6 months in prison for an unflattering portrayal of King Louis Philippe as Gargantua, who devours everything in sight. Daumier shifted to lighthearted social satire for the publisher's other illustrated newspaper, Le Charivari. Daumier's lithograph seen here seems to make a statement about vanity. The text reads, "To think that Arsenault was not happy to be portrayed, daguerreotyped, lithographed, and biographed. Now I have to pay 3,000 francs for her marble bust. It's hard. To make matters worse, I find myself obliged to dust my wife every morning, and she makes a lot of dust, my wife. Both lithographs here are by Daumier and are from a series named Les Bas Bleus, as was the previous print. This translates to the term blue stocking, used to mock the growing feminist literary movement. Daumier's blue stocking series appears to be rumblings about rebellious women who ignore their husbands and children in pursuit of their personal ambitions. He portrayed women generally as ugly, whiny, and incompetent in running the household. On the left, Daumier ridicules and belittles two women who converse about an upcoming literary event. On the right, the wife complains about the crying child as she seeks to write in quiet about the joys of motherhood. The father replies, that's all right, he'll shut up. I'll go and give him a whip in the other room. Aside. In fact, all of my wife's works, it's the one that makes the most noise in the world. Social satire has mocked fashion with extreme hairdos and dress. In American Edward Crumbl's print, he depicts Indiana Senator Albert Beveridge with a noticeably small torso paired with a wildly large head and high starched collar, which would have been stylish in the early 1900s. Spaniard Francisco Goya's interest in social satire emerged when he was already an accomplished artist in his 50s. He studied British political satires that friends had brought back from London. Goya's first major print series was Los Caprichos of 1799, literally meaning caprices. He turned the spotlight on human vices, foibles, and corruption in Spanish society and the Catholic Church. Out Hunting for Teeth on the left is a parody of people's superstitious beliefs. A woman who averts her gaze and protects her face pulls the teeth of a hanged man for their purported use in spells. The church was the focus of critique for its abuse of power and corruption. In What a Tailor Can Do, on the right, a reverential woman kneels in prayer in front of a towering figure dressed as a clergyman. Upon closer examination, we find that the gathering of followers has been deceived by a tree cloaked in a monk's robes, a reference to the tailor's cunning in the caption. Goya may be also criticizing the deception on the part of priests and monks. On the other hand, the crowd is guilty of blind faith, perhaps as the woman in the foreground gazes up with her eyes wide open. Mindful that his prints were intended for the public, Goya tried to leave interpretations open to multiple readings and kept people anonymous. The Spanish Inquisition, on behalf of the Catholic Church, cultivated a repressive atmosphere as they kept an eye on bookstores and print shops seeking out evidence of heresy. Instead, Goya's prints were sold in perfume and liquor shops. Despite these measures, literally days after announcement of the artist series, the prints were withdrawn for sale, resulting in only a few sets sold. Artists successful in this genre utilize an arsenal of techniques, so let's look more closely at that visual language that has become synonymous with graphic satire. Caricature refers to a type of exaggerated portrait drawing. The Italian word caricaco and caricare translates to load and to exaggerate. In the 1590s, Agostino and Annibale Carracci made pen and ink drawings of profiles with distorted features intended for comic relief. Sculptor and architect Gian Lorenzo Bernini is thought to have been the earliest artist to make amusing caricatures of well-known figures such as the Pope, cardinals, and kings. Surprisingly, caricatures were made by Eugène Delacroix and Claude Monet. Caricature can target somebody's appearance, body, and physique. Select features can be distorted without obscuring the identity of the subject. We can see this in this comparison between Edward Crumble's political cartoon and photographs of both Indiana senators. Charles Fairbanks served as vice president to President Theodore Roosevelt. The artist retained Fairbanks' distinctive thick mustache. He looks to be slender and tall. On the right is a photo of Senator Albert Beveridge, who was clean-shaven and looks to be more average in height. He wears his distinctive high collar. Another strategy is presenting incongruities. In this case, the incongruities are relative scale. the artist could elicit laughter by showing an absurd pairing of contrasting physical body types side by side. Here we see very big and tall versus small and squat. In Kreml's Senatorial Hall of Fame, the size difference between the two Indiana senators gives the impression that Beveridge is more childlike, or at least subordinate to Fairbanks. Kreml first had a career as an accountant for Western Union. All the while he continued to draw on the side. He sent some of his cartoons to Harper's at the urging of a friend and was surprised to receive money for them. He quickly quit his job and became a full-time contributor. In Frederick Opper's Hall of Presidents on the right, Uncle Sam towers over President Benjamin Harrison, who is so small that he's even dwarfed by his hat. His diminutive stature equates to his inadequacies in comparison to the line of large sculptures of past presidents. Uncle Sam says that he is only able to give him a, quote, mighty small statuette. Harrison holds written notes pointing to his failures. Once we see a powerful figure portrayed as pint-sized, can we ever take them seriously? Opper's only formal art training was one semester at Cooper Union. He was hired at 23 years old and supplied drawings to Puck magazine for 19 years. Exaggeration of an individual's facial and bodily features can be humorous, but the artist can amplify this response by producing them as a large group, as seen in Charles Jameson Grant's etching, The Russell Purge. The row of politicians bear noses that are bulbous, elongated, pointed, droopy, or snub. Cheeks are scrunched and the bodies are attenuated and shrunk. William Gropper, on the right, used a room full of businessmen in suits. Their faces are described in the fewest of lines. He also relied on contrast and scale to show power relationships. Mexican artist Jose Guadalupe Posada used exaggerated facial features, but also heightened physical actions with over-the-top bodily gestures in a theatrical manner. Dramatic, chaotic compositions with diagonal movement point to the absurdity of the situation. The use of bizarre, fanciful creatures dates back to the margins of medieval manuscripts, sculptures in cathedrals, and prints. On the left, Peter Bruegel the Elder morphed human bodies with inanimate objects such as money bags and chests. In Peter van der Borch's etching on the right, monkeys cavort. Artists enjoyed using animals engaged in human activities. Animals that held emblematic meanings helped to reveal undesirable aspects. In van der Borch's depiction, his subjects are plump, but not overly obese, as the absurdity of depicting people as monkeys, busy overeating and drinking, was probably sufficiently humorous. Thomas Nast was America's first major political cartoonist. His most famous series of cartoons that cemented his reputation was focused on Commissioner of Public Works William M. Tweed, also known as Boss Tweed. His crooked circle included the mayor, city controller, and commissioner of parks. The group had influence on the city's money and legislature, resulting in the embezzlement of hundreds of millions of dollars from the state. Nast created over 200 scathing drawings of Tweed, always pointing towards his corruption, power, and lack of personal morality and honesty. In the brains that achieved the Tammany victory at the Rochester Democratic Convention, Nast replaced Tweed's head with a bag full of money. Nast popularized the dollar sign as a symbol for greed. I couldn't help but think of Daumier when I saw Nast's money bag-headed Boss Tweed. Repeatedly, Daumier and other French journals likened King Louis Philippe's head with a pear. It began with the illustrations by his publisher, who grew a gradual progression of heads of the monarch transitioning into a pear, as we see on the right. Louis Philippe's sagging cheeks and heavy body fed into this image. His initials LP followed with the French word for pear, la poire, and colloquially it meant simpleton. Arthur B. Frost created fanciful creatures by merging humans with beasts on the right. He placed the heads of two Democratic politicians from Indiana and New York on the bodies of an ox and a donkey. Nast developed a body of political or pictorial symbols to convey ideas. The artist relied on imagery that would be universally recognized, rather like visual shorthand, to help him communicate ideas more succinctly. Although not the originator of the national symbol, He popularized Uncle Sam with a tall hat and long striped pants. In lightning speed of honesty, Uncle Sam rides a snail, known for his slow speed. Congress is inscribed on the snail's shell. Irony is an effective way to emphasize hypocrisy, targeting the absurdity of a situation or even simply to elicit laughs from the viewer. Reading the papers that Uncle Sam holds, we understand the print must have been related to the Resumption Act of 1875 that restored the country to the gold standard. In Power of the Press on the left, Nast used animals or animalistic features as a comedic strategy. Flared bulbous noses and large yawning mouths that seem more animal-like than human are used in Goya's Now It Is Time from Los Caprichos on the right. The use of the grotesque has been a common strategy for humor. It was a term coined in the 15th century to describe animal, plant, mythical creatures being discovered in ancient Roman frescoes. In Northern European countries, the grotesque tended to have ugly and evil-looking features. They subvert art's accepted standards of beauty. French, British, and American satirists use them to highlight coarse behavior and moral lapses. Conjurers and witches mixing potions are seen in two prints in the collection. In Grant's etching, John Russell, who was an advocate for social reform, pours medicine, or nostrum, into a mixing bowl. The print professes to offer a remedy and cure for things listed including corruption and all anti-national diseases plaguing the country. In Nast's Power of the Press, cloaked figures tend to a witch's cauldron and cook up the newspaper's enchantments, including allegations, frights, scandals, and sensations. Apparently no one is safe from ridicule, not even Nast's line of work. The title is accompanied by an excerpt from William Shakespeare's Macbeth involving three witches. Nast was a fan of the playwright and referenced 23 plays and over 100 cartoons. Nast used the subject of three witches brewing in two other prints. This work's composition shares a likeness with Daumier's Une Mauvaise Cuisine from 1850. It would not be surprising if Nast followed the social satire of European artists Daumier, William Hogarth, and James Gilray. Images of processions have been a staple in prints ranging from funerals to triumphal entries into cities. They documented historical events, but it was also a way to show a big group of people. The parade of people exuding pomp and circumstance was a prime opportunity for satirists to mock public figures. There is a small procession in the background of Nast's Power of the Press. The figures' dress recall Greco-Roman, royalty, and military attire. President Ulysses Grant heads the procession away from the witch's cauldron. The president was guilty of showing favoritism towards his military friends from the war. Perhaps this is the reason for Nast's accusation of military despotism seen in the figure following him. Trailing behind is presidential appointee Thomas Murphy, who was charged with corruption and setting up a profiteering ring at the New York Custom House. Even if we are unfamiliar with the specific content, we can still recognize humor in it. Satire emerged first in literature, so it makes sense that we find an interplay between word and image in its visual counterpart. Graphic satire can be so effective, even when overwriting, sometimes, in its ability to condense information. Daumier's works were accompanied by written text to add meaning. Each week, the publication Le Charivari gave him 3 to 5 lithographic stones. Daumier worked quickly and often added a number for reference. The printer would make several prints that were used to review the quality and for the artist to make corrections. One was for the text editor, who wrote the accompanying text. In The Owner's Wine, the subject looks to be a disagreement over the quality of the wine between the wine producer and a wine drinker. It reads, "This is my own wine. I harvested it myself. You just have to get used to it." Ah, my friend, something inside me tells me that I'll never get used to it. Maison Aubert sold journals by subscription like La Caricature, including works by Daumier. Some were printed on white paper with blank versos that allowed people to frame and hang them on the wall. This may be the case with this print by Daumier. Unlike Daumier, who moved from political to social satire, Nast shifted his attention to national politics. Central was Horace Greeley, editor for the New York Tribune and surprising presidential nominee. Nast portrayed Greeley in a trench coat with a pamphlet peeking out of his coat pocket referencing the book he authored in 1871. Despite having admittedly limited knowledge on the subject, he proceeded to write What I Know of Farming. Nast delighted in repeatedly using Greeley's words as a catchphrase to question Greeley's expertise on the range of topics. So in this case, again, text was so integral into the work. Thanks for listening today. Feel free to stop in the Print and Drawing Study Center to see these works in person. Please join me on January 8th when we will look at 2 portfolios focusing on Mexico. The Mexican People portfolio was published by the Popular Graphics Workshop in 1964. It includes prints by mostly Mexican artists showing the people at work from different regions of Mexico. The Mexican portfolio from 1967 consists of photogravures by American photographer Paul Strand, made during a visit in the early 1930s upon the invitation of the Mexican government.